Hello all, it's James Johnson, aka Sulphur Blade, and I'm back here for yet another Joe Biden video. In this particular video, I just wanted to bring, well, actually, more like take a walk down memory lane. So, currently one of the hot topics in Washington is the issue about immigration. Of course, we've heard about Trump's wall, and of course, we've heard the lies about Trump's wall. Those lies, for instance, being that Trump hasn't built any wall, that he's only built 9 miles of wall, when in actuality, the replacement of what was anti-vehicle barriers along many stretches of the easiest to get across areas of our Mexican border is exactly where we started to build the wall, because the wall is easiest to build where you have easy access, and there's different sections of the border with Mexico that are not as easy to get to, and so yeah, it was pretty. It was the logical place to start, was with replacing the anti-vehicle boundaries with the new actual wall. It's a huge difference. So the anti-vehicle boundaries were like 3 feet high, and an average person could just crawl over the top of them. No, not really a barrier against a human being on foot. Certainly a barrier for someone trying to drive across the border. Anyway, I just bring that up because, you know, that is one of the common misinformation tactics that Democrats like to use. They like to say that, well, Trump didn't even build his wall. He's only built 9 miles of wall, and that's just BS. He's built like over 600 miles of wall. It's just that they're trying to claim that the swapping out of vehicle barriers for new wall is not new wall, that the vehicle barriers were a wall before, and therefore Trump hasn't built new wall. That's the type of semantics type games that the Democrats like to play in this instance. So we know the Democrats are very pro immigration. Let's just everyone in. Let's give them taxpayers' money for this, that, and the other. But it wasn't always that way, which is kind of interesting. So let's go back to the 1970s. Donald Rumsfeld, he wrote a book not long ago. The biography of Gerald Ford is what it was titled. When the Center Held was published in 2018, the book clearly articulates that President Ford was a good man, a special American, and a greatly underrated president. However, there was a story in the book that was alarming. In 1975, President Ford was left to manage the difficult ending of the Vietnam War. As North Vietnam seized the opportunity to test American resolve following the President Nixon's resignation, President Ford went to Congress to ask for a relief package to push back on the North Vietnamese to allow American personnel and our allies to evacuate. However, there was one U.S. senator who opposed any such support. The result was the embarrassing and hurried evacuation from the roof of the American embassy in Saigon. So, I want to correct a little bit of that statement, because, of course, Donald Rumsfeld is certainly framing this in a specific light. So it wasn't just one senator. There were a few senators. By and large, the most vocal was Senator Byrd and Senator Joe Biden. Senator Byrd, some of you may be aware of. He is the former Grand Master of the Ku Klux Klan and very longtime friend of Joe Biden, who Joe Biden actually eulogized and spoke at his funeral. Anyway, so Byrd and Biden were both very much against this. Continuing on in the book. The senator revealed in the embarrassment and did anything he could to leverage it politically against Ford. Despite the efforts of this U.S. senator, Ford managed to rescue 1,500 South Vietnamese allies prior to country's fall. Had Ford not acted quickly, these people would have been targeted and slaughtered for their support of America. Saving them was a moral obligation. When they arrived in America, President Ford asked Congress for a package to assist these refugees in integration to American society. But the troublesome U.S. senator showed up again and torpedoed any support for these shell-shocked refugees. Instead, Ford had to recruit Christian organizations to offer assistance on a voluntary basis. As he did so, the aforementioned senator belittled those efforts. What kind of person would oppose President Ford's tireless work to do the right and humanitarian thing? Who would want to play politics with the well-being of innocent people who stood by America in the tragic Vietnam War? The name of that U.S. senator was Joseph Biden. So this story, well, it should mean something to just about every American citizen, but it should actually mean a little bit more to the swing state of Wisconsin. And why is that? Well, Wisconsin, specifically Marathon County, specifically the fairly, well, by Wisconsin standards, large city of Wausau, Wisconsin, is a place where a large amount of these immigrants were relocated. In fact, in Wisconsin there is almost a little bit of a slang joke. Now, whether this is tasteless or not, remember, it's a joke. And that joke goes something along the lines of, when you're in Wausau, you're among friends, to denote the large populace of Hmongs that were relocated to that specific area of the country after the Vietnam War. Now, one would say that their integration into American society may have gone smoother had they had U.S. government support, etc. And that maybe they wouldn't have ended up in, well, basically kind of like a downtrodden, low-income suburb of Wausau. Wausau's not really it's not really a big enough city to have quote-unquote suburb, but the Hmong residents geographically chose to stick together, and it was just a fact that their section of Wausau was lower income. It had a poorer standard than the rest of the town. And this ended up causing, at least in the 80s, and possibly the 90s, actual violence. So gang violence, where the Hmongs kind of like formed together as their own little gangs, and they would get conflicts with the non-Hmongs that lived in Wausau. I mean, it's nothing like gang violence that you hear in, say, New York or Los Angeles, but it was certainly something that was rather different when you, by and large, look at the rest of northern Wisconsin being a very rural area where that type of thing doesn't really exist. However, there were issues of that in Wausau, Wisconsin. And one might say that maybe those issues never would have happened if they had gotten money and help relocating from the federal government in the first place, instead of having to get it through Christian charity organizations. And now, for those of you who are like, oh, this is a bunch of bullshit, this didn't actually happen, well, I did as much as I could, because remember, the internet did not exist. Well, it wasn't a thing in 1975. Let's just put it that way. So here we have the New York Times. This is an archive of the New York Times, dated May 7th, 1975. So, Washington, May 6th. President Ford described today as damned mad about widespread opposition to resettlement of 130,000 Vietnamese and Cambodians in the country. Appealed tonight to the nation to welcome these people. I am primarily very upset because the United States has had a long tradition of opening its doors to immigrants of all countries, he said at his evening news conference. We're a country built by immigrants from all areas of the world, and we've always been a very humanitarian nation. And when I read or heard the comments made a few days ago, I was disappointed and very upset, he said. Meets with delegation. His remarks about the opposition to refugee resettlement was reported by Republican congressional leaders and administration officials who attended a White House meeting on the refugee issue with the president this morning. Okay, so we'll stop real quick. President Ford is Republican. Congress, and these are Congress Republican leaders. However, obviously Joe Biden's a Democrat, and just so that we know how Ford matches on the political line, here we are. So we'll continue on. It just burns me up that these great humanitarians, the president was quoted further by Senator Hugh Scott, the Senate Minority Leader from Pennsylvania, they just want to turn their backs. We didn't do it to the Hungarians, we didn't do it to the Cubans, and damn it, we're not going to do it now. Mr. Ford was referring to the settlement of 40,000 Hungarians and 675,000 Cuban refugees in this country since 1956, after the Hungarian Revolt and the takeover of Cuba by Fidel Castro. So this is interesting, right? A Republican minority Senate and a Republican president are having issues with the Democrats on trying to let 130,000 Vietnamese into the country. This is the Democratic Party that today thinks everyone should walk into the country whenever they want. Antagonism spreads. But as the president spoke, antagonists to the Vietnamese refugee relief program in the House and the Senate and mail to the White House and Congress was predominantly against assistance for the Vietnamese. White House spokesman reported that 2,809 messages contained in telegrams and letters opposed aid, while 2,451 were for the aid. Speaking to reporters this morning, Senator Robert C. Byrd, the former Klansman, who Joe Biden eulogized and considered his mentor in the Senate of West Virginia, the assistant majority leader, predicted that President Ford's request yesterday for $507 million for refugee transport and resettlement would be cut. There's no political support for it in this country, he said. Screening suggested, Senator Byrd said he thought the administration ought to see to it that undesirables be screened out of the settlement process, naming barmaids, prostitutes, and criminals as excludable categories. In a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing with the Secretary of State, Kissinger, and Senator Joseph Biden, Democrat of Delaware, charged that the administration had not informed Congress adequately about the number of refugees to be brought here. So, there are two notable senators from back in 1975 that worked tirelessly against Gerald Ford's attempt to fund the resettlements of the of the Vietnamese and Cambodians after Vietnam. And those two senators were Joseph Biden and the former Klansman Robert C. Byrd. And here it is, New York Times. There's true proof. It really actually happened. So it's not just something out of a book that Donald Rumsfeld wrote one day. You know, it's not just Donald Rumsfeld's recollection of what happened being errant. It actually happened. It's actual written fact. So, this is Joseph Biden. This is who he is. And so you should all be, I don't know, aware of the man you're voting for or not voting for coming up this election cycle. Anyway, I am James Johnson, aka Sulfur Plate. Hopefully you've enjoyed the content. If so, please leave a like and subscribe. And until the next time, all, peace.